Welcome to Life Mosaic, where we explore the living legacy that connects generations for a lifetime and beyond. Here, life is all inclusive, embracing every moment and memory that shapes who we are. We're not just sharing people's stories, we are celebrating the timeless bond that weaves our lives together, transcending time and space. Join us as we uncover the beautiful mosaic of life.
This is part 2 of Life Mosaic's interview with Sharon Bowker from Sweden. Please enjoy it and go back to episode 7 to be able to hear our first part of Sharon so that you can get double the Sharon and double the fun right here on Life Mosaic Podcast. We're going to get to the things that you and I both love and get into radio and the streaming apps and all that here in a minute. But do you have any fun early job stories that you'd like to share?
One of my earliest jobs, a friend of my father's owned a big filling station. It wasn't a service station. I mean, the best we could do was maybe change somebody's oil. There wasn't a mechanic employed there or anything, but it was a big service station, and it had a little convenience store attached to it, and it was right on I-65 in Lafayette. And when you're at a big gas station like that off of an interstate, you get to meet all kinds of people. And so I, even though I was a little bit on the young side, I ended up working for my dad's friend. And I always wanted to actually be one of the kids that pumped the gas, but they always thought, you're too short or you're a girl or whatever. I mean, this was long enough ago where that was kind of an issue for them. I always wanted to be outside, but the guy who owned the place liked to have me on the cash register because despite our conversation about math, I was really good at making change for some reason.
Because you are good at math. You just had it in your head that you don't like math.
That's right. And I just believed that I sucked at it. But yeah, so one of my earliest jobs where I actually, earned a paycheck was running the cash register, always during daylight hours and on the weekends and stuff when it was a really busy place. And I got to meet so many interesting people doing that because folks from all over the world were traveling between Indianapolis and Chicago on I-65, right? So that was one of my earliest jobs. Then all through high school and college, I worked at a local amusement park. And so literally running the ride. But I got to drive the train and I would run the merry-go-round. And I did that like all summer long and earned a salary for that. And that was a really, really fun summer job to have.
And you probably got the free passes when you were off to go through the amusement park, right?
I did. But, I was so tired of being there. And I had, and I hope this isn't too graphic for the audience, but I had cleaned up after enough people who had been sick on the tilt-a-whirl that I just did not want to be in the park really when I wasn't working. But one of the cool things we could do is as an employee of the Parks and Rec department, we were able to play on the municipal golf course for free.
Oh, okay.
So that was really how I learned to play golf because I could play for free on our local course that was run by the Parks and Recreation Department. And we were crazy. I can't believe now at my age now, it's hard to remember how much energy you have when you're a young person. But we used to get up in the morning early enough to play 18 friends of mine. And I would get up. We all worked at the park together. The park didn't open until like 11:30. So we would get up, go down to the golf course, play 18 holes of golf, and then go to work all day in the amusement park. And it's like, so I was doing basically 12-hour days, during the summer. It's like, how did I have the energy for that? But that was
you were
really,
a kid.
That's right. I was, 17, 18, 19 years old. That's why I had energy for that. I had been around the game because my dad had played in college. And so I knew a little bit about it. And evidently I didn't have too many bad habits because I was pretty much self-taught. And then I finally got around to taking a golf class as part of my physical education requirement in college. And then I actually, had some help straightening out, my swing and some of those sorts of things. And then my other job as a college student was as a waitress. And So you get a real appreciation for the service industry when you've worked in it. I don't know if either one of you has ever worked in the service industry in that way, but it was very, very hard work. Also got to meet a lot of really nice people, and it was actually some of the best money I actually made while I was in college, high school and college, because the restaurant it was I don't know if this is even a chain anymore in the United States. It was a restaurant called Sizzler. It was a steakhouse. I don't know if
Yeah.
this is familiar to you guys at all.
I have heard of it, have been
Have
to
you
a
heard of
few
it?
of them, but I haven't. But I don't know if they're still in operation or
I
not.
don't know if they are or not, but our town got one. And what was really interesting about Sizzler was that people went through a line and they ordered their own food. And then they usually got their first drink and stuff and they went to their table. But there was a waitress that needed to bring the food to them when their order was ready and, keep the drinks refilled, make sure they had all the condiments they wanted, everything that a waitress would normally have to do, except we didn't have to take the orders. This was kind of a new concept in Lafayette at the time. And patrons didn't know what to do because it wasn't really a full service restaurant from the standpoint that you would expect to get, tips. So we were all making minimum wage. So everybody was making a minimum wage paycheck, which granted wasn't a lot, but we were making minimum wage paycheck plus tips in cash. And so that was actually some of the best money that I ever made while I was in school, because I actually got to draw, again, it was minimum wage at the time, but that's what all of those jobs were, that kind of wage, right? But I got to take home cash tips on top of that. So I always had money in my pocket at that point in my life, which was kind of fun.
So so you're in Sweden, but we all have to have a little town or city that we live in. So you live in Malmo. What is Malmo like?
Well, Malmo is a wonderful place. It is Sweden's third largest city. The first would be Stockholm, and then Gothenburg, which most Americans I think have heard of. And then there's Malmo, and we're in the very, very deep south. And we're on the water. We are on the coast. I like to call it the Swedish Riviera, actually.
Oh, nice.
And we actually are directly across the Öresund Strait from Denmark. And so when people are planning to come and visit me, which I strongly encourage, we had a very big dry spell during the pandemic, of course, but people are starting to kind of come back. You actually want to fly into Copenhagen, because Copenhagen, Denmark is just across a bridge and a tunnel from where I live. That's the closest international airport. If you flew to Stockholm, you'd be 7 hours. You'd be a 7-hour drive away, because Stockholm is so far north of here. And Stockholm is only kind of halfway up the country. If you think from a geographic standpoint, Sweden is essentially the same size geographically as California from end to end.
Okay.
So it's a long country.
Yeah.
And Stockholm is quite a distance from here. So I always have to be really clear with folks that Copenhagen is really how you get to me. And then it's super convenient. You just, the train runs right underneath the airport. So you just go down an escalator, hop on a train, and in 18 minutes, you're in Sweden. So, and in fact, my wife actually works in Copenhagen. There are a lot of people that commute and back and forth between the two countries.
That's cool.
I get that, because where I live in South Carolina, but I live just over the border of North Carolina. So to get to me, you need to come to Charlotte. And then you find me. And you have to go over a bridge.
Well, you'd be right at home here.
Yeah.
You would have no problem whatsoever.
No problems at all. I understood exactly what you were talking about.
The plane, the train though, would be nicer to have a train than Louise, than trying to get to you from the Charlotte airport.
Oh, yeah. Traffic is a lot.
Yeah.
Traffic is crazy. Yeah, I understand that. But yeah, Malmo is it's a nice sized city. I mean, I say it's Sweden's third largest city. I think it's only about, I think it's under 300,000 people. I think it's around 250,000 people. So it's a good sized city. We've got, professional football teams. We've got an opera house and a dance theater. There's lots of culture, lots of sports. We're extremely close to Copenhagen, very convenient to get to Copenhagen, and that is a major European capital. So there's all kinds of things going on over there. So culturally, there's always, and entertainment wise, there's always something to do, which I really like. But it also feels very navigable. It does not feel like a big city. It's very walkable, and it's actually Sweden's most international city. I think at one point they said the population here represents about 78 different countries.
Oh, wow.
So it's
That's
very
really
it's
cool.
very cosmopolitan in that way. And because of that, it's a little, dare I say, warmer and friendlier than, say, even Stockholm, because you have all these folks that are not Scandinavians, that are not Swedes, that are impacting the local culture here. So it's a really nice city. It's beautifully situated right on the Oresund. And
For us that aren't familiar, you just talked about the Orson. What
the
is the Orson?
Oresund, I think it's part of the North Sea, but it's that, whatever that ocean is, that Sweden and Norway and Denmark, I think it's the North Sea, but they have names for all these little bodies of water, that, between the countries. So the Oresund Strait is the strait between Denmark and Sweden in this particular location, and that's where the bridge is. And the bridge is quite famous.
I know you're friends with Rich, but he shared with me before,
Mhm.
before we were picking out guests and everything, that unfortunately you had a health issue after you moved to Sweden. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. I had a little bit of a scare. It was a little bit more than just a scare. I'd had my hair cut. I had thought that perhaps a small sliver of hair, at a sharp angle, had perhaps ended up in my eye and irritated it. And so the
Mhm.
first experience I had with my eye kind of swelling up and getting red and angry and nasty, I was just sure that that's what the problem was. I went to see an eye doctor. They took a look at it. They said, "Yeah, it looks, it's really, it's a little bit pissed off, Sharon. But here, we're going to give you some medicine for it." And whatever they gave me cleared it right up, no problem. Well, then a number of months later, it flared up again. But this time, I didn't have the haircut. I couldn't think, what would I have possibly done to make this eye so angry. Once again, I was being smart, being a good advocate for my health, made sure I got in to see to see an eye doctor, and they took a look at me. And this time they prescribed a steroid, which also took care of the swelling, made seemed to make everything fine. Everything looked good. The third time, then a number of months after that, I want to say close to 6 or 8 months after that, one day I was walking down the hallway at my job, and I realized that my field of vision had changed. I suddenly, my field of vision was not as
Mm.
broad as it normally would be. And I'm like, okay, that's not good. So once again, I chased down an eye doctor. This time they did the whole dilation. I mean, previously they had looked at me, but they'd never
Yeah.
dilated the eye, really gone in and taken a super good look. And by the time they did that, they were initially concerned that maybe my retina was detaching, and that needs to be taken care of immediately if that's happening. And this time they dilated the eye, really took a good look in there, and there was a tumor in the choroidal layer of the eye, and it was pretty good sized. I mean, it was obviously at a size at that point where it was starting to affect my vision, and that was the start of the drama of confirm it. They sent me up to Stockholm to confirm the diagnosis because they really wanted me to see some ocular oncology specialists up there,
Mhm.
confirm the diagnosis. There was a period of time where they thought they gave me the option of trying to save the eye, and at this point, my vision's affected. It was so aggravating to me that I needed to wear a patch. I needed to just keep it covered because it was messing with my equilibrium and everything. And they were going to give me a chance to try to save it. But at that point, they were very frank and said, well, this tumor is large enough that even if we were to take you up to Stockholm, and I would have needed to be confined in the hospital while they put a very small radiated patch on this tumor within my eye. They said, even if we were to shrink it, it's large enough that I don't know, we have no idea what your eye would look like. And at that point, I had done some research about, well, it's a form of melanoma, and melanoma is a really dangerous and
Oh,
scary
yeah.
type of
Yes, it
cancer
is.
if it ends up in your internal organs. And once we kind of weighed all the pros and cons of that, once I was aware of how dangerous that of a cancer that was, I was like, just take it. I just want you to take it. I want it out of my head. And at that point, the doctors up in Stockholm actually estimated that it had probably been there for close to 2 years. It
Oh,
was
wow.
very slow growing cancer. And who knows if it had, and it was in a location where it took it a long time to affect my vision. So I made the choice quite quickly, actually, once we had all the information, that I just wanted them to take the eye. And so that was it was Thanksgiving weekend of 2007.
Oh, wow.
And that I had the surgery in the run up to that. And my mother, bless her heart, she had just visited us in the summer. She visited when she was alive. She visited fairly regularly every other year or so she'd come. And she had just spent a couple of weeks with us in the summertime. So her travel budget was just gone. And she had just spent 3 weeks with us. But when we got that diagnosis, my wife, she wasn't my wife at the time, but same person, said to me, do you want your mother here? And I'm like, yeah, I kind of want my mother here. My wife and my extended family all kind of rallied together to make sure that they could put my mom back on a plane
Aw.
Oh, that's
to
so
come back
nice.
over. And she came and was with us here for the surgery. And I think she was as much of a comfort to Ulis as she was to me, quite frankly. And she was with us for another 3 weeks after I had that surgery, and stayed with me while I sort of did my initial recovery from that. So that was in 2007. And then, of course, as with any cancer diagnosis, then you go on what I call the cancer watch, where they want to
Yeah.
monitor you. They got to make sure it hasn't spread. I went through a bunch of testing, as you usually do, to ensure that that was the original cancer and that it wasn't turning up in my eye because it started somewhere else. That was all fine. But we needed to make sure that in the time that it was sitting in my eye, it hadn't spread anywhere else. So for 5 years, every 6 months, I went through the usual battery of tests.
Yeah.
There was blood work, and there was usually something that they would do a CAT scan. They would do a chest x-ray. They do a CAT scan of my liver with contrast, whatever it was. There were every 6 months I had a series of tests. And then I saw an oncologist who looked me over and, gave me the all clear until the next 6 months, rolled around. And we did that for 5 years. And that was pretty life-changing, only from the standpoint that, up until that point, we thought we were going to maybe have kids. When I got this diagnosis, that really it really made us kind of rethink that, because neither one of us had any interest in being a single parent, and that was a realistic possibility, in the future. At that time, we didn't know. The other thing was that my wife, who had just graduated a year or so before that with a PhD in molecular medicine, she was looking for work all over Europe. But when I got that diagnosis, she didn't want to take me away from my doctors. So that sort of changed the course of her career, because she didn't want to, like I said, she wanted me to be able to stay here with the medical system that we knew. And so it changed a lot of things. It changed the trajectory of her career for sure, because she felt we needed to stay here. And it also changed, I think, potentially the structure of our family, because up until then we were talking about being parents.
Yeah.
And it kind of took that off the table for us as well. Mhm.
It's so interesting hearing about your life in Sweden. Rich is the one who brought you to my attention,
Mhm.
and I think he probably has a few more questions for you, and I am really looking forward to hearing more about how you guys met.
Uh-oh, I might be in trouble.
You're in trouble now, Sharon.
Uh-oh.
Oh my goodness, Sharon, you and I both share a love for radio, and
Yes.
you worked a little bit in radio. So tell us a little about that.
My high school had a radio station, so I got bit by the bug really early. I was like, a freshman in high school. I would have been, or a sophomore actually, because it was a senior high school. So I would have been a sophomore in high school, and we had a station in my school that I was fascinated by that. And I spent every available, all of my study halls. I took the courses. I mean, we had courses in radio and television. Actually, it wasn't just a radio station. We also had a TV studio
Oh
there.
wow.
And so I took classes in radio and TV production, and I was on the air as a high school student for like 3 years and just adored it. And when I graduated, there was absolutely no question that I was going to study radio and TV or telecommunications. I think my college diploma actually says telecommunications, Bachelor of Science in Telecommunications, but there was no question that I was going to study that. And then, and I thought when I first started studying broadcast, I thought I was going to go into sales
Okay.
because that's where you made all the money, right, Rich?
Yeah,
It's in the
definitely.
sales side. It's
Oh
it's
yeah.
not on the air. And I everyone told me, oh, you've got the personality for it. You're a good networker. You're a good relationship builder. That's where you want to be, Sharon. You want to be in broadcast sales. So I took marketing as a minor, for example, and I was ready to graduate from college, and I worked at the college station throughout my university career as well. So by the time I graduated from college, I had been working at radio stations for 7 years,
Wow.
as a new college graduate, but never at a commercial station. So then I graduate, I moved down to Florida because I was just feeling at that time, I needed a change. I wanted to get out of the Midwest. I felt like I really just needed to take a to make that break, and so I ended up in Southwest Florida working for a big AM FM TV operation, and I started out in sales, and guess what? I hated it. Okay, so I took a step back and I took this position with this admin position with this AM FM TV combo that was in Fort Myers, and kind of learning the back end of the business, and trying to decide if that's where I really wanted to be, if I still really wanted to work in advertising sales. And this station had a fantastic production studio, and it did a lot of production, not just for its own stations, but it rented out this production studio for all kinds of uses in that part of Florida at the time. At this time, they didn't have a whole lot of talent on air that were women, and they were in constant need of female voices. I started to regularly get tapped to be the female voice whenever they needed a female voice in a commercial for a client. I kind of that kind of got bitten by a different bug really at that point, because I really enjoyed the performance side of that, and the kind of acting. And I had been active in student theater and civic theater and stuff. I had done all of that stuff, but I had never really connected it to a radio career before. So I had to do a little bit of a reassessment. Came home back to Indiana for my sister's wedding, and thought, you know what, I'm going to go back to school. And we got to. I'm living in this town with this fantastic big university here. I'm going to go back to school, and I think I'm going to study public relations. I'm going to do a master's in public relations. And then I discovered that by virtue of moving down to Florida for a year, I had lost my Indiana residency, and I was going to have to pay out of state tuition.
Oh,
And it's like, well, I guess we're going to put that plan on hold for a little bit. And it was at that point that I said, okay, what am I going to do while I wait until I get my Indiana residency back? And that's when I got my first radio news job. and it put me. I was a local kid. I mean, I was a local young person. I had a good network, existing network. I knew the town, and they were looking for a part-time news anchor at one of the stations in Lafayette, and I ended up taking that job and becoming the weekend radio news anchor. And I got to go out and cover news and cover stories and cover school board meetings and all that stuff. And that's how my radio career really got launched in the Midwestern US. And I was on the air as a news anchor and a reporter in Lafayette, off and on, almost right up until I moved to Sweden,
Oh, that's
quite
cool.
frankly. But always as a news anchor. I
Yeah.
was never the disc jockey, and I know you've heard me talk about this
Yes, I have.
on Station Head, Rich, right? Um, I didn't get to be the disc jockey. I was the news anchor. I was the person that came in and interrupted the music to tell you what had happened at the school board meeting last night.
You got to talk about all the glamour stuff.
Yeah, I got to do all the fun stuff.
And the DJs were saying,
here's
"Oh
the-
my goodness, here's
here's
Sharon
the
messing
farm
up.
report."
Here's Sharon messing up my show again."
Exactly. That's exactly it, Rich.
That kind of leads to how we met because we both love radio. So I remember, and I think this was our first meeting, but correct me if I'm wrong. We were both on an app and a radio app, and I can't say the name because it makes me sad because it didn't work out.
I
But
know.
we found our way to other places. But
Right.
from what I can remember, I was involved in the very early stages of the app, and there was not a chat function for a good long while. And a lot of the hosts, the only way you could connect with the other listeners is if they called in. It was really old school, like radio, call into your DJ kind of thing. And we had a lot of fun with that. Me and some of the early folks, a lot of them you would know, they were still on there when you came around. Once they added the chat function, it's like the call-ins went by the wayside. Nobody
They
wanted to
disappeared.
call in. And I was trying to get people to call in on a show, and I wasn't very familiar with you. I think we had seen each other in passing before. Maybe I had listened to a show or two, or maybe you had listened to a show or two, but we really weren't traveling in the same circle. I remember you called in, and I was so happy to have a caller. I'm like, I don't really know who this Sharon, this Viking's Diary is, but you called in, and we had the most wonderful conversation. So that's how I remember meeting you through that previous app that we were on.
I can't even remember what it. I was so fascinated by that app as well, Rich. And I thought, wow, what a cool thing! All these people kind of connecting through their love of music, and I loved, and the call-in feature fascinated me. And I think you might have been the first show I actually called into, because I
I think
remember
so.
I wasn't quite sure how how technically how it worked. Do I push this button? Do I unmute here or whatever? But yeah, you were you were talking about something and encouraging folks to call in. And I'm like, all right, I'm just going to pull the trigger on this. I'm going to do this. He sounds like a nice guy. What can it hurt? And so that was how we connected, and we started following each other, on that original app, and then followed each other over to a new location, because we all had the bug by then. We all loved being able to essentially host our own shows, within an app, which is what we both can do on Station Head, which is where we're both still active now. But yeah, that was how we met, Wheezy. We were both radio nerds, and we kind of started participating in each other's shows a little bit in the chats and occasionally calling in. And then we also found out, Rich, that we share a little bit of a faith background as well.
We do. We do. When you lived over here in the U.S., you were an Episcopalian, and
Yep.
I am an Episcopalian as well. So we share that. And even I think I read a while back, the Church of Sweden has become in full communion with the Episcopal Church. And then there's Anglicans all over the world as well. There's a couple of names they like to use. In some parts of the world, you're Anglican. In some parts, you're Episcopalian. But we're all one one like-minded group.
And sadly, the closest Anglican church to me here is over in Copenhagen. And while Copenhagen is very close, the location of this church is not easy to get to
Yeah.
on a regular basis.
It's really cool to connect in those type of ways. And
Yeah.
the other thing I really like, I even just like the name of your show, Viking Diaries, and that's how we know you on the radio apps on Stationhead. We know you
That's
as the
true.
Viking
That's true.
Diaries. You had a wonderful show today as well. The day we're recording, you come on Wednesdays, so
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. I don't know what was happening with your computer screen. You were having some issues.
Yeah, I was having some technical issues today, but the music was still good.
Well, we have enjoyed having you so much. You've got such wonderful stories, and I've learned a lot more about you. I already liked you before now, but it's just so neat to get to know you better. And what the reason we titled the podcast Life Mosaic is really an example of what you just showed us today. Every little thing from childhood, from being bad at math, from health troubles and jobs and
She
all of
wasn't
that.
bad at math. She's math insecure.
Math insecure. All of that has just added little pieces to the mosaic of your life, and it's just a wonderful story you have, and I have just had a wonderful time having you on the show today.
Well, thank you so much, Rich. It's just been my pleasure. Always so fun to chat with you. And it was wonderful to meet you too, Weezy. I mean, Rich has talked to me about you before and that, you guys had this project going on together. So I wish you just all kinds of success with it. And it was super, super cool to get to meet you as well.
I really enjoyed having you on as our guest today and to come together in life similarities like math.
Mathphobia.
We all have this audio, technical, video component that we go together, all for the love of the God that we worship and different things like that. That it just goes to show you, no matter where you are, there's somebody in some country, some continent in the world that you can connect with.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Life Mosaic today. We're available anywhere you find podcasts or at lifemosaic.me.